Why take a particular interest with the uncanny today? Freud made the uncanny famous in his 1919 essay by that name, exploring the eeriness of dolls and waxworks. But for a century, it remained a professional term, used in a few very specific disciplines: psychology, sociology, literature and cinema, robotics and animation. It seldom made it into idle conversation. Nowadays, everyone, everywhere, whether knowingly or not, is talking about it. The uncanny is all around us, in our haunted homes, beaming from our screens, and the ghostly streets of our transformed cities. It's in the fabric of everyday life, in the sudden strangeness of daily routines. A fear not from a clearly defined and well-known unknown, but from the ordinary, the well-trod, the familiar, the self. A fear not triggered by alienation, not external, a fear coming from inside the house. None of us are strangers to the disruption of daily life. Wars, terror attacks, nuclear accidents, oil spills, and natural disasters afflict every region, strain economies, damage cities, injure homes and families. But we're still far from a complete understanding of the exceptionality of the COVID-19 event in history, being both on a global scale, but also extremely intimate. At a particular moment in 2020, billions of people all over the world experienced a complete upheaval of their lives and routines as they were asked, sometimes required, to quarantine in their home, to shelter in place. This, surprisingly, did not coincide with reports from the front lines, at least not as we were used to them. Hospital Wing C isn't exactly the Somme, Iwo Jima, or New York City on 9/11. There were no reports from the engineering teams at the nuclear accidents or from the rescue efforts at the tsunami-hit coastal region. The shock includes a disruption of perspective. We now receive periodic reports from the Ministry of Education about the opening and closing of kindergartens and schools. There are heated debates on the news about visits to mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, and how to celebrate Passover Seder, Thanksgiving, or Christmas. And there's also the many smaller, personal dilemmas. Do I hug the friend who went through a painful breakup, or the one who just found out she has cancer? We all went through, are still going through, a difficult and strange process of alienation from what we know, perceive, identify as familiar, as ourselves. We were not drafted for military reserve duty, did not need to flee our own homes. On the contrary, we were not refugees, nor were we in the trenches. Our trenches were the city streets and boulevards. The battlefield was on Zoom. A lull in the fight was a step from the bedroom to the living room. A return from the front line was a drive from home to work. We also had no idea if and which of these disruptions are temporary or permanent, and if these life changes are good or bad, which makes them even harder to address, to process, to understand how we feel about them. How do we talk about all of this? What's the story we tell? How do we integrate the past year into our vision of our futures? All of this, along with the political shocks, social, economic, and health distress, have generated in many an increased anxiety, an anxiety that has brought the uncanny to our mental doorstep and to the front and center of the psychological, social, and cultural stages. Might the uncanny be the new dominant fear in the soon-to-be new normal time? Not fear of an unknown other, but fear of an unknowable self. This is why at Utopia we decided to take a long, hard look at the uncanny and explore it in our second edition. In my article, I delve into the heart of the in vogue internet conspiracy QAnon and suggest that uncanny fears are a main motivating factor in its acceptance and propagation. And of course, there are a few science fiction recommendations to try out. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't be afraid.